The early morning sun cast its golden rays across the sprawling military training ground, burning off the last shreds of mist that lingered over the grass. Soldiers stood in precise rows, their boots planted firmly in the dirt, uniforms sharp and pressed, eyes forward as the morning bugle faded into silence. The cool air still carried the tang of dew, though the promise of heat was already beginning to rise from the horizon. At the front of the formation, Colonel Richard Harkkins paced like a predator, his boots crunching against gravel. He was a man who prided himself on authority and control. His voice, roughened by years of command, cut through the stillness with the sharpness of a blade. Straight backs. Chins up. You're soldiers of the United States Army, not children waiting for recess, he barked, his voice echoing against the barracks in the distance. Every head snapped straighter, shoulders tightening. Even the birds seemed to scatter at his tone. At the far end of the row stood Captain Sarah Blake. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable. She was younger than most of the officers surrounding her, but her eyes carried a weight beyond her years. Unlike the others, she did not fidget, did not shift her weight. She stood silent, composed, as though bracing herself for what she already knew was coming. Colonel Harkkins slowed his pace as he reached her end of the line. His gaze landed on her with something between disdain and amusement. To him, today was routine, a physical training test, another day to assert dominance, to remind soldiers who held the power. But Sarah Blake's presence presented him with an opportunity he couldn't resist, an officer whose reputation, in his eyes, didn't match the expectations of the uniform she wore. He smirked, folding his hands behind his back. "Captain Blake," he said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "What excuse will it be today? Knee trouble? Shortness of breath? Or perhaps you're simply here to drain government resources by pretending to belong among real soldiers?" A ripple of snickers rolled down the line of troops. Some stifled their laughter behind their hands, others whispered under their breath. The colonel's words had hit their mark. Mockery was an effective weapon in front of peers. Sarah did not flinch. Her gaze remained forward, cold and steady, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had faced far worse than ridicule. To the soldiers, she seemed fragile, a small-framed woman surrounded by larger, bulkier men. Many assumed her position was the result of politics, connections, or the Army's growing inclusivity. Few truly knew her story. Colonel Harkkins paced again, his voice growing louder, each insult intended to strip away her dignity. "Dead weight. That's what you are, Captain," he sneered. "Do you know what happens to dead weight in combat? It gets men killed. Maybe the Army isn't the right place for you. Maybe you'd be better off at home knitting sweaters." Laughter rang louder now, less restrained. A few soldiers glanced at Sarah with pity, others with scorn. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. But still, she remained silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, and carried a conviction that cut through the mockery like a razor. "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "you don't know what I've carried." The colonel paused, his smirk faltering slightly at her calm defiance. But he quickly recovered, rolling his eyes. "Carried," he mocked. "You mean excuses? Prove it, Captain. Let's see you make it through the obstacle course. Maybe then, I'll believe you're not just here to waste everyone's time." Cheers rose from the soldiers, eager for a spectacle. They wanted to see her fail, to watch the fragile officer stumble and confirm every whisper about her not belonging. Sarah's expression did not change. She simply nodded once. The group moved toward the obstacle course, wooden walls, rope climbs, balance beams, mud pits, and barbed wire sprawled across the training field like a gauntlet of pain. The sun was higher now, heat licking at their necks. Colonel Harkkins folded his arms. Let's see if our excuse-maker can even climb a wall. Sarah stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt. She began to run. She wasn't fast. Her stride was shorter than the men around her, her breathing more strained. But her eyes never wavered from the course ahead. Each step was deliberate, fueled not by pride, but by a quiet, unshakable will. The first obstacle, a wooden wall, loomed before her. She leapt, fingers gripping the edge. For a moment, she struggled, her side aching, her muscles burning. Soldiers snickered. But then, slowly, she pulled herself over and dropped down the other side. The laughter softened. She pressed on. Balance beams, crawling under wire, mud sucking at her boots. She faltered, stumbled, but never stopped. Every obstacle cleared was a silent rebellion against every sneer, every whisper. At the rope climb, her body betrayed her. Halfway up, her arms trembled, her breath ragged. She clung desperately, the coarse fibers digging into her palms. Colonel Harkkins smirked, his voice rising above the silence. I knew it. You're nothing but a burden, Captain. Weakness in uniform. Go on, quit while you're behind. Soldiers fell silent. Their eyes were on Sarah now, but not in ridicule. Something in her struggle, in her stubborn refusal to let go, had shifted the air. She slid back down, boots hitting the dirt. For a long moment, she simply stood there, chest heaving. Then, slowly, she reached up and unbuttoned her jacket. Gasps echoed through the crowd as she peeled it off, revealing a faded undershirt stretched across her shoulders. Beneath the fabric, pale scars cut jagged lines across her skin and ribs, old wounds, deep and unyielding. One soldier whispered, his voice cracking, "That's shrapnel." Sarah's voice, calm but firm, carried across the field. These scars aren't weakness. They're the reason 3 of your men are still alive today. The colonel froze. His mocking grin slipped from his face. The field fell into silence. Years earlier. Iraq. The desert night was alive with chaos, explosions shaking the ground, tracer rounds cutting through the darkness. A convoy had been ambushed, vehicles burning, smoke choking the air. Sarah Blake was there, a younger officer then, her uniform torn, face blooded. Mortar fire rained down as she shielded wounded men, dragging one soldier to cover, then another. Medics shouted at her to stop, to save herself. But she ignored them. She kept going, muscles screaming, lungs on fire. An explosion ripped through the air. Shrapnel tore into her side, knocking her down. Pain seared her body, but she forced herself up, staggering to her feet. With blood running down her arm, she hauled another soldier onto her back, stumbling toward safety. She collapsed only after the last man had been pulled behind cover. Refused evacuation until every other soldier had been accounted for. She never boasted. She never told her story. Because real warriors did not need to shout their scars. Back in the present, the silence of the training ground was deafening. The soldiers who had once laughed now stood in awe, their expressions transformed. Colonel Harkins' face turned pale. His lips parted, but no words came. From behind, footsteps approached. The base commander, General Stern, had arrived, having overheard enough. His presence was commanding, his voice even more so. "Colonel Harkins," Stern said, his tone cold, "if you ever mock one of my decorated officers again, you'll find yourself standing before the Board of Inquiry. Captain Blake is a Silver Star recipient. She's earned more respect in one night than you will in a lifetime of insults." The colonel stiffened, his arrogance draining. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The soldiers straightened. Several snapped to salute Sarah Blake without hesitation. Sarah pulled her jacket back on, buttoning it carefully. She lifted her gear, slinging it over her shoulder. Without a word, she walked past the rows of soldiers. They stepped aside for her, their eyes filled with newfound respect. One young private whispered, "You're an inspiration." Sarah gave no reply. She simply kept walking, her gaze fixed forward, her expression calm and dignified. At the edge of the field, she stopped, turning back once to look at the training ground. Her scars, now hidden beneath her uniform again, were no less real. They had mocked her for being weak. But those scars carried a story of courage none of them could ever match.